This war in Ukraine is a decisive war, which will determine an outcome of the 21st century. How come the Russians say they hit military facilities, but they are hitting civilians with their so-called precision-guided munition? Well, actually, it became the main political tool. They can't defeat Ukrainians on the battlefield. And you probably noticed that this atrocious bombing of the cities are intensified. And now he's betting on the Ukrainian people who will make their government capitulate and sign an agreement that Putin needs. And again, Putin demonstrates his complete misunderstanding of the Ukrainian people. I think that this is a decisive battle. He will lose his power and probably his life too. Today with us from Washington we have Andrey Piontkovsky. Good afternoon. Hello. Hello, Natalia. We will be speaking in Russian, but my first question I would like to ask in Ukrainian. Ukrainians are bravely defending their land. Soldiers and civilians are dying every day. The land is soaked with blood of the soldiers and tears of mothers. When do you think this war will end? The war will end when Ukrainians win. There is no any other choice for them. And partly the answer to this question was given yesterday when the Supreme Commander-in-Chief issued an order to liberate the south of Ukraine. I think that this will be a decisive battle in Russo-Ukrainian war, because liberation of Kherson, and this is the first goal as I understand it, will shock within Russia and will shock all those people who are watching TV, who are zombied by the propaganda. And I think it'll shock those who are in the bunker. I think anybody, including Putin cronies, will see that the war is lost. And very quickly, serious political changes follow up. I don't mean that Democrats will come in power, but I think similar scoundrels will take over. They are responsible for this war together with Putin, but getting rid of the man who started it, they'll have to take a more realistic position and agree with this consolidated approach that the West has. And when I say the West, I mean the UK, the US, Ukraine, France, and Germany. And this approach is that the cease of fire is possible only when the Russian troops are moved to the line of the 23rd of February of 2022. And only then they can start negotiations on a complete recovery of territorial integrity of Russia. But until then, Ukraine will not agree to ceasefire. We are waiting for land lease deliveries. Soon we'll have 12 HIMARS multi-rocket launcher systems. Do you think it's enough? Well, it would be great to have not just 12, say 62. But right now, all Ukrainian experts, they say how effective these weapons are, and if we can see such results after using 12 HIMARS systems, just imagine what's going to happen after using 50 of them. And of course, when we speak about foreign assistance, particularly American We always say more, 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 faster, 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 and it's really true. But there are certain objective impediments, logistical impediments. It takes time to train Ukrainian troops to use these weapons. We know that first in Poland there are gun squads from Ukraine who are trained how to use HIMARS systems, and then they go to the battlefield. There was a great initiative of Boris Johnson, who turned out to be the best friend of Ukraine. The UK is going to train 10,000 Ukrainian troops per month. So, and I could say that it's just started rolling, and it's going to be just one movement to one direction, and the Russian army will be deprived of its fire superiority, as it was deprived of their tank superiority. All these tanks, they became an easy target for Ukrainian army. That's why in the second phase of the war, the Kremlin bets on barrage of fire, as they obliterate the cities and then they push Ukrainian troops out of them. So, but this period is almost over. What's interesting, that both sides, they set quite ambitious goals for the near future. The Russians intend to take over Slavyansk, and the Ukrainians to liberate Kherson. That's why it's not a stalemate. Right now, we see the crucial moment in this war. And we hope that Kherson will be liberated. It has a very important military meaning, political and symbolical meaning, to completely destroy that mass support that Putin's so-called special military operation is. When do you think Ukraine returns occupied Kherson? When is it going to happen? It's going to be in the summer, either liberation of Kherson or takeover of Slavyansk. I think in August. That's how it looks. In 2000, when Yeltsin resigned, you wrote a very harsh article, Putinism as the highest and the final phase of bandit capitalism in Russia. Back then, in 2000, you wrote that the war is the main tool of Putin's PR. 22 years passed, so what? Nothing changed? Everything that I wrote in that article is true, and I also wrote that Putinism is zombieing people, and this is the highest and final stage of bandit capitalism. So, and everything actually proved itself. But I don't want to demonstrate myself as a great prophet. What I wrote was absolutely clear to everybody who wanted to see it and who wanted to think. Explosions of apartment buildings. It was the key tool to bring Putin in power. How is it possible this nobody was brought in power, made a national hero? For this they needed a new war in Chechnya, and this will be demonstrated as the fight against terrorism, and this is how it's going to be presented to the Russians. And there was a problem how to start the second war if the first war was so unpopular. And the first war ended because the authorities were pressured by Russian people, and Russian army had to capitulate in Chechnya. They needed some extreme means to start the second war. And these extreme means were explosions of apartment buildings. They accused Chechens for doing this, and we were presented with the hero and savior of Russia who will protect us from terrorism, I mean Putin. But the facts were obvious. Ryazan city, FSB people ordered by Nikolai Patrushev, who is the head of Security Council in Russia. So those guys, they planted explosives in the buildings, and while we were doing this, they were caught by police. And the Minister of Internal Affairs said on TV that there were terrorists who were caught in Ryazan, and then a few hours later, Patrushev said that that was military exercise. And people believed that. And there was a second failure they had. It was a few days before an explosion in Volgodonsk city. A speaker of Russian Parliament Duma, Seleznyov, he incidentally said that he knows that a building in Volgodonsk was exploded, but actually it was in a different city. There was an explosion, but it turned out that Seleznyov knew that in Volgodonsk there will be an explosion a few days before that. So, and I have to say that, to a certain degree, Russian liberals are guilty that was happening. Actually, I was a columnist of Novaya Gazeta newspaper. When I wrote this article, Novaya Gazeta rejected this. They didn't want to publish it. So I had to go to the Communist Party newspaper. Liberals, liberal intelligentsia, they were offered a myth that Putin, yes, he is KGB officer, yes, possibly they exploded apartment buildings and the war is bad, but in order to make him popular, we will have him and we'll get sort of General Pinochet who will bring us to liberal reforms. So that was the construct the KGB offered to liberals. And now all those system liberals who were supporting Putin very actively in the beginning, now they either immigrated or in prison. It's not the people who are to blame for what's happening. These are actually the elite liberal intelligentsia. They consciously brought Putin in power. Last week, Putin had new statements, new threats to Ukraine. What's your take on his words when he said that Russia didn't even start the war yet, especially when he said that the war till the end, when all Ukrainians are dead? So what does he want? Well, actually what he wants, he wrote in his famous historical article that probably everybody in Ukraine read. There are two main statements. There is no such a state as Ukraine. It's just an invention of Austria-Hungary General Staff and Trotsky and Lenin invention, and there is no such people as Ukrainian people. We are kind of one people, and his main goal is to destroy Ukrainian state. And with the latest intensive bombings of the cities and deporting tens of thousands of people, and they're deporting them to Sakhalin Island, to the far east from Mariupol. This is what they call genocide of Ukrainian people. This is his goal. And he also has another goal, and probably even more important for him, is to save his own ass, to keep himself in power, because as soon as he loses his power, he will lose his life. And he is probably mad in his hatred to the West and to Ukraine. But in terms of his own protection, he is pretty rational. And the plan he had, this blitzkrieg, when he wanted to take over Kiev and declaring new government in Kiev, this plan will never work out. That's why his goal now is Before the decisive fight they'll have in August, he'll try to take over biggest chunks of Ukrainian territory, and that's why they're aiming at Slavyansk. And after that, he will mobilize all his Western agents, just the same they had it with the Italian plan with Macron, Scholz, and Draghi. They came to Kiev on the 16th of June, and their plan failed. He'll use some other agents, maybe the Pope. And under the threat of the bombings and shootings of civilians, he thinks he'll make Ukrainian government capitulate and cease fire, and some parts of Ukrainian territory he will have under his control, not only Donetsk and Lugansk, but also Zaporozhye region and Kherson. And he will be able to sell this to the Russian people as a victory. But this will be just an interim step to his strategic goal to completely destroy Ukrainian state. This is his plans. Who can stop Putin? Only the Ukrainian army. They can do it, but they can do it only with a full-fledged support from the West. We're rebuking the United States, and we're saying more and faster. But actually, it's not that it will come, it's actually coming. The HIMARS systems already changing the situation on the battlefield, and political and military leadership of Ukraine officially announced that they will be liberating the south of Ukraine, and probably they say that because they know what's happening after using these new weapons, and they see the prospects. Another question. In the articles and books, you wrote a lot about filtration camps in Chechnya. We're experiencing this here now in Mariupol, and they deported almost 2 million Ukrainians. How safe it is for Ukrainians, refugees, to be in Russia? Well, actually, there were some of Ukrainians who were voluntarily moved. But actually, when we talk about filtration camps, I wouldn't say that it was anything voluntary there. Majority of people who were forcefully deported. I was actually absolutely shocked with the geography of that, why they had to move Ukrainians from Mariupol. They moved them to Sakhalin, whereas they could move them to Crimea. Why Sakhalin? Why Far East? And that's probably part of that genocidal plan that they have. And now, yesterday, Putin had that statement saying that Russian passports will be handed to Ukrainians. So, and this is the realization of his plan, that there are no Ukrainians, that there are just one people. And in his genocidal plans, he's quite persistent. So let's see what he will say during the international tribunal trials. In every interview I give, I say that the International Military Tribunal should be held in Mariupol, in the building of that theater that was destroyed. I know that Italians are going to restore it and rebuild it, but let the first performance of the theater be similar trials, to Nuremberg trials. And we have war crimes like Putin and Patrushev, who should be there. Completely destroyed Mariupol, tens of thousands of civilians killed in that city. Can we consider that as a victory of Russia? Well, Putin and his propaganda, they're selling it as Russian victory. And probably you as professionals, sometimes you watch Russian propaganda channels. I have to do that in order to see what's going on, to see what the trends are. And I have to tell you, nothing even close to that was back when Stalin was alive. I was a boy when Stalin was alive, and I was, one of those pioneers and members, and I listened to radio and watched some TV, and there was nothing like that. Hitler didn't have anything like that that Putin has, because radio was the main source of propaganda. But Russian television is absolutely shameless propaganda. I would say it's hard radiation, very hard. Before the interview with you, I kind of skimmed through some of the TV shows on Russian TV. Russian propaganda host Skabeyeva, she has 5 hours a day, 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 hours in the evening. And for these 2.5 hours, I kind of skipped through it for 20 minutes, and I have to tell you, my mood was very much spoiled. It impacts me, I mean this hard radiation, and let alone a regular person in Russia. Television is a terrifying force. How come the Russians say they hit military facilities, but they're hitting civilians? Well, actually, it became the main political tool. They can defeat the Ukrainian army on the battlefield. Putin wants to make Ukrainian government sign an armistice that will give him a chance to take over a large chunk of Ukrainian territory. Probably you noticed that these atrocious bombings of these cities, they are intensified after the mission of Western leaders failed, because Putin was hoping that Western leaders make Zelensky sign an armistice, that Macron, Draghi and Scholz will do it. And now he's betting on the Ukrainian people who are dying under the bombings will make its government capitulate and sign the agreement that Putin needs. Again and again, he demonstrates that he completely misunderstands the Ukrainian people. In some of your books, I saw these words. The super weapon of 21st century, this is the people. I wrote about a nuclear blackmail of Putin, and that's one of his main tools of pressuring the West. He kind of saying, I'm such a madman that I can use a nuclear bomb. His favorite words are, so we will go to heaven and they just die. That shows us that he is ready for nuclear exchange, and he will be immediately retaliated, and there will be many losses among the Russian people. Together with Patrushev, they developed such a strategy, de-escalation by nuclear escalation. And they understand that the Russian army is inferior to NATO army on the conventional level. And actually, Russia is inferior to the West in everything, in economy, technology, and civilization development, and in how the army works, because we can see what they use on the battlefield. But there is one advantage, as Putin thinks. This is his readiness to use nuclear weapons. The West is not ready to use nuclear weapons because it means that hundreds of thousands of people will die in Russia and in the West. But they together developed a scenario that Russia will get involved in conventional war with the West. Russia is losing, and they actually understand that. Putin actually admitted it at his press conference after meeting with Macron. He said, yes, we are inferior to NATO on conventional level, but we have nuclear weapons. What does it mean then? You know, the West has nuclear weapons as well. But his advantage is, I can use it, and you wimps cannot do it. And I don't even give a damn that if we are retaliated, you destroy millions of people in Russia. So my population is just a tool in my great geopolitical fight against the West. Well, that's, approximately how he thinks. But not to get distracted with this nuclear subject, we can speak about it a lot. Why not? Today they also showed some super powerful nuclear missile. Well, actually he behaves like a bully in a school. Just look, this deplorable state of the Russian army shows that Russia is inferior to the West in all military equipment. He's been an idiot. He has spent an enormous money on all these nuclear toys, all these Samrata missiles, Poseidon torpedoes and all that. See, a nuclear parity between the US and the Soviet Union and Russia then, and it's been sustained like that after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, that parity is based on the point that two countries can destroy each other 10 times, but now he has so many nuclear weapons that he can destroy the United States 15 times, and he never thought probably about what his advantage is, and he kind of enjoys this military toys, and they're absolutely useless. These toys, like Samrata ballistic missiles, she's kind of saying, you are threatening us with HIMARS systems, and I will be threatening you with Sarmat missiles. They can only use it if they want to destroy the whole world. But I don't think that he will be allowed to implement this scenario. That's a metaphor, that he has a nuclear button on his table that he'll push and a nuclear war starts. To use nuclear weapons is a very complicated process, and dozens of people are involved in this process. First of all, in order to start that, so Supreme Commander-in-Chief has to negotiate it with all the heads of general staff, then the order should be cascaded down. And actually, all these talks are about the tactical nuclear weapons. So everybody understands that he is not so mad to throw ballistic missiles at other countries. They may destroy Lvov city, for example. Let me interrupt you for a second. I have to ask you about Lvov, because it's my hometown. No, he's not going to destroy Lvov. No, don't worry about it. Tactical nuclear weapons are stored in warehouses, and there is a special system of transportation of these weapons to the launchers. And all these processes are controlled by foreign intelligence. And Americans are firmly saying that they don't see any movements there. There is no any evidence that the weapons are transported. And as you can see, the intelligence information is very accurate. That's why he's not going to use tactical nuclear weapons. There are not so many madmen among his people, and as I said, there are many people are involved. Russians threaten a lot that they will be hitting decision-making centers. Well, see, they kind of trying to be brave. They say they're going to bomb London, the United States, and many other countries and cities. But I have to tell you this. I'm here in Washington. I know what's happening here. I see the moves in Pentagon, and they're kind of dreaming that some piece of some shell would fall on the territory of some NATO country, say Poland, and then Western army will have their hands untied, because right now their hands are tied by the politicians. You probably remember when Biden was sending HIMARSs, he didn't give missiles with a range that allow Ukrainians to hit targets on the Russian territory. For example, an airport in Belgrade, Belgorod, where they have planes that are bombing Ukrainian cities. But if something falls on a NATO territory, so-called Article 5 territory, and Americans will have their hands untied, and they will destroy Russian troops in Donbas within a couple of hours, using all their firepower. Forget about nuclear and centers of decision-making. He is threatening Kiev. He's threatening that he will destroy government buildings. And it's not a secret that there are commando units that are working in Kiev, and there is always a threat. For real. But now Putin is kind of weighing different chances. He understands what's happening. He's kind of rushing about between two motives. On the one hand, he is expanding his terrorist activities, and he thinks that this is a way to pressure Ukrainian government. He wants to make them capitulate. But on the other hand, he understands that he destroys all the arguments for his supporters in Europe and America. And he will need those Putin-Verstein people when he wants to sign an armistice. That's why his policy is so impulsive and spontaneous. Do you think that Russians will move further? In his Crimea speech, Putin said, Putin actually repeated all the statements of Hitler's speech after Hitler took over Sudetenland. And when he said that we're divided people and we have to unite, and that was the main theme of Hitler propaganda. And it's like, it's not only our right, but we have to protect our compatriots, we need to annex, we need to bring people back, and then there will be annexation of Baltic states. And actually Ukraine is saving the Baltic states and saving the West today, because Putin thought that it's going to take him a couple of weeks and Ukraine will be conquered, and he will declare Novorossiya country there, and there will be this bright land. But it turned out that it's not. It's Donbas and Lugansk region where bandits are ruling. And why I'm saying that when he was saying, "Are you ready to die for Narva?" and it's paraphrasing the statements of Hitler in 1930s, when Hitler was saying, "Are you ready to die for the free city of Danzig?" And this Hitler-Putin phraseology, it's "I ready to die for Danzig or die for Narva," it actually worked out so far. And now the West realized that it's not only a threat to destroy the Ukrainian state, it's also a threat to destroy the West as a whole. Maybe with some reservations, maybe with some second thoughts, but the West is turning to Ukraine, is helping Ukraine. And Narva and Warsaw and the whole Western camp is fighting against Putin. The Ukrainians were disappointed with Boris Johnson's resignation. Do you think that the UK policy towards Ukraine will change? Actually, I was surprised and disappointed with this resignation. It was quite symbolic and politically, because you probably feel that the UK is your most loyal ally and friend, because by supporting Ukraine, and I have to say that it's not just position of Boris Johnson, by supporting Ukraine, the UK is kind of reliving its historical youth. Today, Ukraine fighting one-on-ones with Putin, this is kind of a remake of what was happening with the UK in the 40s when they're fighting Hitler one-on-ones. And they were comparing Zelensky with Churchill. And Boris Johnson played a huge role in the fight that was happening within the United States between the supporters of Ukraine, like Blinken, General Austin, and the pro-Putin groups that is headed by the security head Sullivan. And support of Ukraine, main role in this was played by Johnson. And I think that after the war, Johnson should be given a Hero Medal of Ukraine. So that's why we're so disappointed in this. But actually, in terms of supporting Ukraine, there's not going to be a change. Probably the UK is probably the only Western country is not split. The elites of this country are not split in terms of Ukraine, and mainly because of the reason that I said that for the Brits, this is a repetition of what was happening in the battle for the UK back in 1940s. And again, I have to say that the role of the individual in history is very important, and with charismatic acts and with his passionate support of Ukraine, Boris Johnson played a great role. But actually, he is not going to leave anywhere. He will stay for a few months as a prime minister. Then after him there will be someone who will fully support his position on Ukraine. And another very inspiring fact, Boris Johnson's candidacy is seriously considered for the position of Secretary General of NATO, and he will be quite useful there, even more probably useful on that position. So let's wish him luck. That's why I was a little bit disappointed with the pettiness of politicians and conservatives. First, what they blame him for. They said there was some inappropriate party that he had during the COVID restrictions, and then some third-rank official of his did something wrong there. So, and see that this is petty, because the war that is happening in Ukraine right now is a decisive war, and it will determine an outcome of the 21st century. The victory of the horde will be a humiliating failure of the West that, happened after a catastrophe in Afghanistan. But it's going to be this catastrophe in Afghanistan is nothing compared to what's going to happen if they're defeated in Ukraine. And immediately China will take over Taiwan. And absolutely dark times will come. Fascists, they are pulled to each other. And the latest information, Putin is going to Iran. He will meet on the 19th of June with the president of Iran and the supreme leader of Iran. And on the one hand, it's tragic, but on the other hand, it's pretty funny that Iran will be given weapons to Russia. Russia is running out of drones, and China didn't dare to do that, but now there is a state for the first time that will be supporting Putin on that. So then it seems that the key war criminals, they'll have to move a little bit on the trials bench for more of them. Victoria Sparks versus Yermak, President Zelensky, head of the office, says, what do you think about it? Well, see, there is a quite hot discussion in Ukraine about this. And again, we see the split of political forces in Ukraine, this face-off between Zelensky supporters and Poroshenko supporters. And it seemed that this split was overcome, facing this existential fight with Russia. But Victoria Sparks' scandal, so to speak, kind of revived it. Myself, as a citizen of aggressor state, I don't want to snoop into Ukrainian politics, but I would like to say a couple of neutral words. First of all, Yermak is not my hero. I was always harshly criticizing him, and probably if you watched my interviews in 2019 and 2020, I was criticizing him when he was a frontman of this policy of finding a common language with Russia. And we remember how he signed a protocol on consultancy board for Donetsk-Lugansk region, and which was rejected by Ukrainian parliament. So I always had some mistrust with him. But in this letter that Victoria Sparks wrote, I think in this letter there are some absolutely ruinous statements that harm Ukraine more than any potential spying activity that Yermak might do. And she didn't calm down. She wrote a letter to Zelensky, and yesterday I saw her talk on Ukrainian TV, and the main theme that she has is like, where does our money go? Because she positions herself as an American taxpayer, and she's absolutely indignant that there is no control over the money that is sent to Ukraine. And this theme, where does our money go, is the theme of all the enemies of Ukraine in the West. And Austin and Blinken are trying to fight that. And she actually writes in her letter all those statements of Russian propaganda. She says, the weapons can get into wrong hands, and Russian propaganda hosts Skabeyeva and others, they say that. And within the American society, she might be a great Ukrainian patriot, and she probably doesn't have ill intentions. But by saying what she is saying, she is given the most convenient arguments for the anti-Ukrainian party. But I don't mean Democrats or Republican Party. I'm just saying that the majority of these parties, they are pro-Ukraine, but in each of these parties there is a minority that falls for these arguments. And that's why she gives these arguments for this pro-Putin party. And this is what I see with my own eyes here in the US. Recently, in Russia, there was a trial, and Alexei Gorinov, municipal deputy, was sentenced to 7 years for calling war a war. Many people are put in prison, and some people are silent. Can these people change anything, those who speak up? Well, they can change, and they do change, because they are changing the future of Russia. They are saving Russia's honor. Strategically, Russia lost the war. Now the most important question is what Russia's place in the world will be. There are actually quite many of these people. Thousands of people are in prison for what they call discrediting a Russian army and distributing fakes about the army. There are thousands of them. I don't have the latest stats, but a month ago there were 7,000 people who were arrested for picketing, for rallying. It's quite a number, and people consciously go for that. They know they will be humiliated and taunted in prison, but this is how they save Russia's honor. And I remember this phrase, one of the leader of the Prague Spring. Only 7 people protested on the Red Square against Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia. And this person said, now we Czechs, we have 7 reasons not to hate Russia. And I want to say to Ukrainians, they have at least 7,000 reasons not to hate Russians. In the world, they discuss the problem of lack of food, how real the threat of famine is. Moscow will be sophisticatedly using this argument, the argument of the famine, in order to get some concessions. And again, they want to get the most important political concession that Putin is trying to get from the West. He wants the West to pressure Ukraine so that they sign an agreement with Putin. That he will use gas blackmail, all these tricks with Nord Stream. He will be creating this threat with the famine too. He will bring it to the edge, and then at the very last moment he will try to get concessions. But I think he will be interrupted with the successes of Ukrainian army. Thank you, Andrei. Glory to Ukraine. I know that you know this greeting. Glory to heroes. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you.